Okay, welcome everyone. We'll just allow a few seconds here for participants to join. I can see the numbers growing quickly as we've opened up this panel session. We'll get started. We are recording the session today. We'll send you a link to it afterwards. We're really looking forward to our panel discussion around creating stronger medtech partnerships. So just as some background, my name is Craig McInnes. I'm co-CEO at MyCaribou, which is a software company. And I'm going to host the session today as moderator. Tell you just a little bit briefly about our platform, and then you won't hear anything else about it till the end. So it is a partner management platform built specifically for medical device manufacturers and distributors. They'll help you accelerate your growth through stronger partnerships. As you can see on the screen there, we have the ability to match and connect partners globally, over 20,000 distributors and 20,000 manufacturers in 125 countries. We have the ability to navigate market data from over 100 countries, collaborate with existing and new partners in secure workspaces, things like sales forecasts, file sharing, discussions, business reviews. Some of the topics we're talking about today would actually be collaborated on in our platform in these workspaces. And then monitoring, measuring partner and market performance globally. Angela will give you a link in the chat to sign up for the platform. It's always free to join. And you can do that any time. Many of you have already joined the platform. As well, just a quick note, at the end of the presentation today, I'll pause for a couple seconds and then I will do a demo for anyone that's interested, but I'll give you a heads up on that in case you want to just drop off. That's absolutely fine. So let's get started. In terms of previous panel discussions, we focused on finding, vetting, and selecting great partners. And then we did a session about structuring a solid contract with meaningful KPIs. Angela will also post a link to the recordings from these previous sessions that are available to you if you want to catch up on some of these topics. But that's the basis going into today's discussion, where we're going to assume that we have the right partner and assume we have a solid contract in place with that partner. And we're going to discuss how effective communication and impactful business reviews can help create stronger, more successful partnerships in new and existing relationships. In terms of registrations, I always like to give people a quick heads up of who's on the call today. So we have hundreds of companies attending from over 50 countries on 6 continents. That's been pretty consistent now over our last 3 or 4 webinars. And then the distribution or breakdown, I should say, by type of company. You can see here roughly 53% manufacturers, 30% distributors and dealers. And then the other piece is actually growing pretty substantially from our first webinars. And these would be logistics providers, regulatory consultants, market consultants, industry associations, trade organizations, all make up that group. And we're hoping for some great questions today from that diverse audience from 6 continents. So we'll mention that as we go along, that we want questions that we'll get to towards the end. So let me introduce you to today's panelists. Really excited to have a great group again this time. So first, Marcus Baiano has over 13 years driven growth at AMT Surgical, which is a leading distributor of surgical systems in Canada. As national sales manager, Marcus has responsibility for building and managing successful partnerships with leading surgical products manufacturers from all around the world. In addition, Marcus manages a sales team with relationships in over 400 hospitals. Then we have Denny Canton. Denny is an experienced advisor to the medical device and consumable sector, supporting manufacturers and distributors to achieve commercial success in overseas markets. Denny has over 20 years in the medical device industry, including senior leadership positions with Cardinal Health and Medline. And Denny now helps manufacturers and distributors achieve their sales growth and profitability as they expand globally. And then lastly, Andy Molnar has over 20 years experience leading teams and achieving substantial growth for medtech companies, including Straumann, Bellamed, and now Milestone Scientific. As Senior Vice President, Global Sales and Business Development, Andy is focused on global growth for Milestone's dental division. Milestone also has a medical products division, which Andy may mention as well as we go along. I will provide contact information. All 3 gentlemen are kind enough to share their contact information with you at the end of the discussion today. As an administrative note, please ask questions as we go. So as you think of them, you can put them into the chat panel or the Q&A. Preference would be in the Q&A panel, but we'll look at both. So go ahead and do that as we go along. Please put those in as you're thinking of them. We'll then try to sort through them towards the end and answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So guys, thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Let's get started with the discussion. The first part of this is there's two pieces. The first is establishing regular and effective communication between partners that focuses on collaboration, not confrontation. So in my role here with my Caribou, I speak with hundreds and hundreds of manufacturers and distributors around the globe over the past several months. And generally, it seems that there's a lot of reactive, not proactive conversations taking place. So Danny, I'm going to start with you and ask you why you think it's so pervasive in medtech that these conversations tend to be reactive and not proactive.
Well, Craig, I personally believe that people are totally consumed on the day-to-day. They're busy firefighting on issues. And of course, it's been recently compounded by the supply chain interruptions that have been caused by COVID. And it's really putting in a big burden on not only the leadership team, but the MedTech ops teams. The second phenomena that I've seen across a number of organizations is this set and forget phenomena. Most or all parties involved assume and agree that the execution plan is happening and everyone's doing their part, and there's no mechanism, no one's slowing down to check otherwise. And then the third element is that many who respond to some of the anticipated events only do so after it's occurred, not necessarily as it's happening, or so again, all of these elements are challenges when it comes to communication.
And Andy, for you at Milestone, obviously you've got the medical division as well as the dental division. You're focused predominantly on finding multiple regional specialty dealers in global markets, including markets like the US. Does that put extra pressure on you in terms of the amount of communication and trying to keep those relationships proactive?
Yes, so that's right. We manufacture actually a local anesthesia delivery system that takes the dread out of visiting the dentist and ensures that medical epidurals are delivered safely and effectively. We've actually got a strong footprint in dental in over 50 countries, so that does create pressure for communication, of course. On the medical business side, it's relatively new to us, so we're working on searching for channel partners. That takes some time. Actually, I want to say that one of the things that attracted me to the My Caribou platform, it was the interest in the combination that it has of matchmaking with distributors and manufacturers with the shared communication platform for plans of performance progress. No doubt we'll come back to that at a later point. So for me, it is important that I have to focus and prioritize because of all of those channel partners. Obviously, I can subdivide them between other team members for the 50 channel partners in dental, and other separate colleagues take care of the medical division as it's in the earlier stages. And in terms of prioritization, maybe just as a distributor is likely to put greater time and effort behind certain manufacturer brands, we have to also put some prioritization of communication and time onto our larger global markets. In dental, whether national or international order fulfillment distributors by nature tend to be more reactive to the dentist expressing an interest that usually is created by marketing activity, whereas specialist channel partners with a tighter portfolio, perhaps regional, national distribution, tend to be more proactive and engaged in selling and demonstrating the product, which is helpful for us. That's kind of what we need. So we're also eager to review what's working and what's not working in our combined approach. So we have to prioritize and we have to focus.
And Marcus, for you as a national specialty distributor, focused on surgical products and operating rooms, what are your thoughts on the proactive versus reactive communication that you have with your suppliers?
Yeah, so building on what both Andy and Denny have both touched on, a key component to ensuring that our communication with our partner suppliers is established and is consistent is setting the expectation up front by agreeing upon the cadence of communication and ensuring that everybody's aligned on the way or the expectations that we have for their respective businesses at the onset of the relationship, will ensure that we're in a position to manage that and maintain it moving forward. Denny mentioned the set it and forget it phenomenon. No doubt that that happens as we all get consumed by the day-to-day. So it's critical that we hold each other accountable to those expectations that we initially set within the agreement or within the onset of the agreement, so that we can continue to ensure that we're aligned and on the same page with the communication, and ensuring that those expectations haven't changed as the business evolves and changes within the market.
And guys, for all three of you, what role does fear play in these communications? I know we talked about that a little bit last week when we got together, but what role does fear play?
You want me to start with that one?
Sure.
So as a distributor, the number one fear is always ensuring that the value proposition that you bring to the relationships is maintained and established, and that as a distributor in Canada, we are holding the relationships with customers. And the ultimate fear is growing the business and then having somebody decide to go direct, which is always a situation that could potentially happen. So again, leaning back on those expectations that we set at the onset of an agreement, it's critical to ensure that as partners, we are aligned in the amount of information, the cadence of the communication is established, so that we're not misaligned moving forward and grievances begin to build between the partnership as that information may be expected and not provided.
Yeah, and I feel fear is definitely plays a role. I mean, fear is what's left if trust is not established. And that's not to be critical of anyone, because the distributors want to protect their customers and geographical coverage from competition. There may be a fear of the manufacturer going directly, as you say. This can hold back some sharing of initiatives and progress. It can slow the success of the parties. On the other hand, manufacturers are desperate to know what's going on. What's the progress with leads, that were particularly leads that maybe the manufacturer generates and are passed over to the partners, and need to have kind of proactive flow of information between the organizations. But it really is kind of important to build trust, so that everyone feels they can be as transparent as possible to help each other.
And I would agree. Transparency, I think, is the key goal there, and to agree on to what level. And the leads is a really good one, Andy, where if you provide a partner with leads, then there's certainly a fair call there to say, well, we do have an expectation that there will be progress updates as time goes on.
Great. So if we think about these reactive relationships and a desire to obviously pivot to proactive conversations with our partners, what are your thoughts? Maybe Andy, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on how we can pivot to a more proactive conversation with our partners?
Yeah, I think it all begins at the beginning around aligned expectations. So the roles of both party, for us in our business, sales, marketing, and education, they're the three core elements of go-to-market in our dental business, and I think in most dental businesses actually. Sales targets or minimum volumes, and the frequency for the formal review process, kind of setting expectations around that, even in the contract, of course. And then having a regular cadence for review. For me, that's kind of informal weekly contact with some of the, let's say, larger partners, and then monthly operationally, and then with a certain level, let's say sales director, marketing director, and then quarterly for perhaps others that are more senior, perhaps the owner of the distributor partner or the divisional manager, let's say. Trust is a big thing in all of this, to create proactive conversations, openness in communication, acceptance of the intentions of everyone's activity, that there's positive intentions, reliability, doing what we say we're going to do. We commit to something and then we do it. And obviously competence. We need to be working with competent partners, and the partners need to feel that the manufacturer is competent in what we're doing. So I think those are some of the things that help proactive communication.
And Marcus, AMT obviously represents multiple global manufacturers, and you're fighting for mind share, of course, as you're working with them. But what are your thoughts on becoming more proactive in your conversation with these partners?
I think Andy really hit the nail on the head with one aspect, and building on the establishment of expectations at the onset of an agreement. It is really holding each other accountable for that communication, ensuring that should a topic arise within a discussion that someone takes and leaves as an action item and says, I'm going to do this, we hold each other accountable for those points. As soon as we start to drop that off or we lose that accountability, the communication immediately becomes reactive, because now we're behind. We're behind in the communication. We're behind in the structure of the arrangement that we agreed to continue to move forward on. And as a result of that, we start to lose the ability of being strategic in the conversations, and we start to become reactive in trying to essentially put out fires. One other point I think is critical in being in communication is forecasting. I think that is something that is mutually valuable to both manufacturers and distribution, and that's ensuring that we're able to provide a certain level of projection on what is coming, what is in the hopper, what is in the pipeline, so that everybody can plan accordingly for that. And a lot of very positive, proactive conversation spins off of that forecasting model and sharing that forecast. So I think that's another significant aspect that we need to consider.
Craig, I'd like to add that regarding cadence, which has been touched on by Andy and Marcus, interdependence. So how dependent are the team members on one another to accomplish, their goals? And it's something that needs to, you need to be mindful of, because if one side of that equation isn't meeting their objective, it could slow the whole process down.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit. Then we started to touch on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is key performance indicators and sales targets. As a biz dev person myself. So in previous webinars and podcasts, and I think Angelo has already posted some links to this, but we have focused in on the importance of key performance indicators, or KPIs, and agreed upon sales targets. And we also discussed how KPIs are leading indicators of future performance, and sales numbers are really trailing indicators of the work done in previous months and quarters. So on that note, and maybe Andy, I'll start with you. How should we incorporate discussions around KPIs and sales targets into our conversations?
Yes, thanks, Greg. Yeah, I think this is the crux of things for me, because it's a successful partnership has to execute on everything from both the manufacturer's perspective and the channel partner, of the respective activities that we're all working on, to critical to moving the sales along. So I definitely want to talk about sales numbers, but I really want to talk about KPI lead indicators as well. The things which can be predictive of moving the sales. So for example, for us at Milestone, the kind of things that we like to look at is leads generated, demonstrations completed, educational events undertaken, for example, 3 sort of KPIs of moving towards the sales performance. And having a scorecard, a shared scorecard around this is something that's kind of really valuable to do. And I mentioned your platform earlier. I've been looking around at platforms to have a shared way of looking at that information, because you can send files to each other and then they get out of date, and it's version control and everything. And I'm actually piloting with one of our US Canadian distributors at the moment, putting into the workspace the forecast, the KPI lead measures, which is actually number of leads, number of demos, and actual sales. So actual sales by salesperson, that level of detail, but not the detail of the leads, not the person, not the organization, but just numbers. So a headline. The channel partners setting the targets, the KPIs with their team. And so that's their role. And it's just that we're sharing the visibility on it in a scorecard way that we can both go into and access at any point. Because, for example, my use of the system, I give them the rights to access that space, and they do that. And we've got transparency between us. We've just started it. We haven't done the first review of that. It's coming up this month. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that transpires. But that's the kind of things that I feel really critical around these KPIs.
Yeah, it's a great segue for Marcus, for you again as a distributor. One of the things I hear is fear of micromanagement that may come from suppliers where there's a heavy focus on KPIs, And, you know, Andy talked to sort of the right level of detail that you can sort of both agree is the right level. But what are your thoughts on that as a distributor?
I agree with what Andy is bringing forward, and understanding and committing to the right level of detail. It's critical. The term micromanagement is an interesting one, in that if you feel like you're being micromanaged, you've missed the boat at the onset of the initial expectations. And that's ultimately what's happened. So to ensure that, specific to our business, being really focused 95% of our business in the operating room across Canada, it's really important to understand what the major objectives of your partner organization, the manufacturing company, are internationally or domestically. If they're in the US or in Europe, where are you going with the organization, and how does that relate to the Canadian market? And really ensuring that you're aligned on the potential of that initiative that your partner has, and how it relates to the Canadian market, and what the potential is in Canada, because it is very different. So establishing that expectation at the onset is critical, and will again lead to really managing efficiently within the communication, setting KPIs that are relevant to the market in Canada. So I sound like a broken record, but it goes back to setting that expectation initially. You've got to be upfront, have a level of transparency, so that when the relationship evolves and your business begins to grow, everybody is aligned on the path that is mutually agreed upon to take within the market, and we're aligned on the cadence of what we're trying to do within the market as well.
Perfect. And Danny, you and I did a podcast together on this very topic of KPIs. I think it's about a 20-minute deep dive into specific KPIs and so on, and managing them between partners. And I think Angela will probably post a link to that podcast in the chat here as well. What are your thoughts, and as it relates to this, relevant to proactive communication?
Well, to add to what's been stated, I personally believe that it's important that the partners collaborate on defining their KPIs and come up with a healthy balance of realistic yet ambitious set of goals. And, you know, transparency has been touched on, you know, accountability. But yeah, it's that healthy balance. It's you know, if they're too challenging, then guess what? We're you know, you're just not going to be in a good space.
So yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, it's near and dear to my heart, this whole topic, because I've managed business development teams for the last 25 years, and just the whole concept of the trailing indicator being sales. We think things are great, but the underlying KPIs are not going well, and so therefore we're going to pay the price down the road. So definitely, you know, near and dear to my heart, and hope people will have a look at that that session on KPIs. So let's just wrapping up the effective communication part of this. Let me just share the screen one more time here. So as we think about lessons learned, which I'm also a big fan of, what are some of the lessons learned in terms of partner communication? You've all got a ton of experience in the space. You've all got lessons learned. Why don't we start with Denny this time?
So on the side of the equation of what's worked, establishing trust, you know, by demonstrating or reminding your partner that you're both striving for the same outcomes. And sticking to strategy, not tactics. So, you know, keep the business reviews at a high level review on the supplier performance. And you've kind of touched on some of these: return on investment, progress towards goals, you know, potential roadblocks, emerging opportunities. And then on the other side of the ledger, on what hasn't worked, well, overlooking non-verbal communication, such as body language or facial expressions. When someone says yes, just to avoid confrontation or to being held accountable is not a good position. And then schedule separate time for operational matters so that the business review doesn't dissolve into a problem-solving and complaint resolution mess. And I think for all those who are viewing today, you know, I'm sure many of you have lived that spiral, and certainly I have.
And I can add to that as well, in looking at it from a specific distribution perspective. And again, I've mentioned it a number of times, what's really worked well is establishing that trust and that level of setting expectations at the onset of the agreement. More importantly on that is holding everybody accountable for their roles within the relationship that we've established. So as we progress and and the business evolves, are we missing things that people have originally agreed to conduct, perform, complete? And as a result of that, is the relationship beginning to is it beginning to show signs of wear and tear, so to speak? Do we need to revisit? Should we always revisit? I'm a firm believer that we always take a look at the overall structure and status of the business every year and do a reset, for lack of a better way of saying it. Specific to surgery, and especially through the pandemic, our business has changed significantly in Canada. Hospitals have locked down, procedures have been restricted, and that's different from country to country. So taking a step back at the onset of a formal business review on an annual basis, and quarterly if you need to do it, if things are changing that swiftly and dramatically, is critical to ensure that the level of communication that we have within the partnership is efficient. And again, everybody's aligned on what the expectations are moving forward.
Andy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think those are really good points. I think for me, coming out of the pandemic, we've had a lot of very efficient communication in the sense of remote calls. It's been very efficient to do things that way, but there's no doubt that coming out of the pandemic, the opportunity for face-to-face meetings is something that kind of a lot of people want to have, because it does build the relationship at a different level than has happened remotely, particularly if you haven't met the person in person that you're as your contact point. And that's true for me in my business, and some of these partners, I've not met them in person yet. And so I'm looking forward to the face-to-face meeting, because I think it will accelerate the trust. Of course, I'm going to prioritize the bigger markets for that, because that's what's doable, let's say. And maybe smaller markets, trade shows where a lot of people from different countries are gathered is a good way to kind of fit that in. So that's kind of my intention there. I just think the conversation's richer, the insights tend to be deeper. In terms of one of the challenges to kind of overcome for me is, I find that the responsiveness levels in communication vary from partner to partner. And I know that I have to manage my own expectations on this, and at the same time agree on the mutual expectations of communication frequency and method, so that we feel that we're being respectful to one another, because I think probably I perhaps expect more and than others sometimes do themselves, right? So that's one of the things I have to manage for myself. That's my responsibility. But it's about open conversation and mutual expectation setting again. And of course, different people have preferences for different communication types as well, including WhatsApp for some of the international markets. So working flexibly is good within that framework.
Great, guys, thanks. So that just wrapping up regular and effective communication, proactive communication. We have a quick poll question. There we go. So what percentage of your partnerships are proactive? So most of you on the call today are managing partnerships. We'd be curious to know what your thoughts on it. If you really are honest with yourself, what percentage are proactive? I'll leave that up for a second as we're moving into. Okay. All right, so let's move into our second topic here, which is around business reviews. So again, just to sort of frame this, we've already talked a little bit about the business review as part of the process. But just to be really clear, let's define a business review as a scheduled meeting between the two partners to discuss and review the outcomes of the partnership. So I think I'll start with Marcus on this one. Which aspects of the relationship do you think should be discussed in these more formal scheduled business reviews?
Sorry, guys, helps when you're off mute. I think you break it down really in a formal business review. You have to break it down into two halves. It is a review of what has transpired in the past and diving a bit deeper as to what contributed to the results that had occurred, what external factors that are out of our control may be potentially happening within a specific market, and what internal factors are having an impact on the results as well. Did we have turnover within sales representation? Were there supply chain backorder issues, things like that? to ensure that everybody's aligned on being able to confirm the details of what was happening within our respective businesses. And then moving forward, it really is taking that information and establishing quality KPIs to ensure that we are either correcting for misaligned KPIs in the past, we are collaborating on how to manage external factors that are now impacting the future of the business, or we're collaborating on how we can ensure that our internal relationships, be it training with sales representation, be it understanding what lead times and projections would be for specific capital or consumable items, getting ahead of those conversations so that as we take that business moving forward to market, we're in a better position to be strategic within the relationship and also approach our customers more efficiently.
Yeah, and I think that I would add to that, I think a consistent agenda that allows both parties to have their needs met is ideal. And for me, it looks a bit like this. I mean, progress versus the sales forecast. I mean, that's a relatively short conversation because it's visible and shared and on screen, let's just say. I'd like to put more allocation of time into the marketing and sales activity that have been done and the learning that's come from what that activity produced, maybe the link back to the sales. I mean, depends on the lead, depends on the life cycle of the sales, the sales cycle as to how quickly that impacts. And then looking forward to the next quarter, and I like to look at this in quarterly sense. I think it makes a lot of sense with business cycles. What activity plans, lead measures are we looking at, and what help is required from the manufacturer to be successful with those activities? And then I like a challenges section around what's getting in the way and needs to be overcome. Not so that we spend a lot of time in problem solving, but kind of we have a shared sense of what the problems are, and then we can start to work on those problems probably offline, more than likely, unless there's some easy, quick resolution that comes to mind. And then returning back to that in a subsequent business review by keeping a record of the issues, kind of an issues record keeping, so that we can show that resolution, we're achieving resolution on certain things. I think that helps the relationship move along, that everyone sees that we're helping one another to be successful.
Danny, any additional thoughts on that? They covered a lot of ground, but.
Well, Craig, this may sound like a real basic one. However, sending that information that Andy and Marcus have touched on, advance, but not just sending it, within the hour or the day before, but also ensuring that the participants have actually gone through the data. If everyone's better prepared, they'll spend less time in the meeting on, the past quarter. And to Andy, what you've just said, it helps the group then spend more time planning for not just the upcoming quarter, but the balance of the financial or fiscal year. And that way, if the data is there and they've distilled, and they've identified gaps or opportunities, then that's where you want to spend the bulk of your time with good, robust discussions.
Excellent. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the frequency of these business review sessions. So how often do you guys think these should be conducted, these more formal reviews, and what factors might impact that? And why don't we start with Andy this time?
Yeah, I think maybe I touched on this in earlier kind of comments. I do like the quarterly formal business review, just to go from the longest kind of gap for review meetings to come and then go more frequent after that. It's got a good cadence and fit. So I like for the distributor partner, general manager or divisional manager to be kind of involved with those. It's kind of kept at high level, the metrics that we kind of touched on and the sort of agenda that we've discussed. But I also like less formal monthly operational meetings with the sales and marketing leaders. I think that helps to get things done, that leads to the quarterly review. And then, of course, as problems arise, we shouldn't wait for a formal meeting to tackle those. We should be tackling those operationally as we go, as frequently as we possibly can. And so that's kind of, operationally happening on a week-to-week basis. it's literally not possible to do this format with every partner that I have just because of the numbers. But certainly for those that are perhaps smaller partners, an understanding of the forecasting. I think this is an important point that Marcus has raised. We need to at least understand mutually how's the forecasting looking, and we can even do that by email if we haven't got that opportunity for a formal review process. But otherwise, that's the frequency that I favor, let's say.
And Danny, as you help global manufacturers go to market in Australia and New Zealand, which is a big part of what you're doing with True North Health, does it matter if it's a brand new relationship versus a relationship that's been in place for years? Does that matter in terms of how often we should do these business reviews?
Well, I personally believe that it does. And so, where possible, and I get your point, Andy, where you've got a roster of partners, you need to prioritize. But I would encourage that in that first year, it's best that while the quarterly reviews may be done virtually or in person, it'd be important to have other touch points, and they could be other means of communication. WhatsApp has been mentioned. There are many others. But just a little bit of handholding is going to, in my view, pay some great dividends at creating that common ground, making sure that that trust factor is well visible, that transparency is there. But once things are going, and if everyone's pointing in the right direction, then I think in years 2 and 3 and beyond, quarterly is fine.
And Marcus, for you, again, as on the distributor side of this, you're managing multiple suppliers of different sizes in terms of your portfolio and so on. What are your thoughts on this topic about frequency?
I think that the frequency of the reviews is completely dependent upon how volatile the business is. And what I mean by that is if the business is very stable, the turn rate on a single-use disposable product is very frequent. There isn't a lot of change. It's a mature market. Could be potentially more commoditized. The reviews aren't as critical because the business isn't changing as frequently as it is. Obviously, that will pick up. There are changes to supply chains, product offering, or external factors within the Canadian market. Then we're going to connect a lot more frequently. But I find that those meetings are typically pushed out to more of a half-year cadence versus scenarios where we're dealing in more reusable capital goods, where forecasting is critical to make sure that we're aligned on what potentially could be coming down the pipeline, setting expectations on lead times for delivery with customers, and ensuring that we're not going to bottleneck somewhere within the process where we may not be able to fulfill a commitment that we've made to a customer. I find that those are more strategic conversations that need to happen with regular cadence. Quarterly reviews, I don't like to say the word review. I'd rather call them quarterly strategic meetings, because it is a meeting about looking forward. It's not a review. I don't want to look in the past the entire time, because if we're doing that, we're just going to wait another 3 months and figure out what we did or didn't do right. It's just not worth our time. So looking at, so again, specifically on that volatile business where we're in a, maybe as Denny mentioned, a new relationship, a high growth vertical, a launch, an introduction into the Canadian market, that cadence has to be higher, because we need to understand where things are at on both sides of the business, downstream and upstream. And then again, mentioning it, I've said it a number of times, the forecasting is critical to make sure that we're aligned on what's coming.
So on that note, a bit of the elephant in the room here, I guess, is discussions around sales pipeline. So let me frame this a little bit. So how do we balance the sensitivities of customer information with the need for visibility in the pipeline between manufacturers and distributors? And specifically, Marcus, I obviously talk to a lot of distributors like yourself, and a common fear I hear is about divulging too much detail at risk of the manufacturer potentially coming into the market direct. So let's maybe have you start. I know it's a tough question, but I'll have you start on that, and what your thoughts are and what the right level is, and how you get around that.
Yeah, I don't think it's a tough question. It's an important one, because again, establishing the expectation at the onset of the relationship is going to determine the amount of information that we are going to be providing. I think ultimately, as mentioned a few times by both Denny and Andy, trust is a critical piece. And typically the level of trust will dictate information that the manufacturer is asking for. So if they don't trust you, they're going to ask for the world. But if you are demonstrating that you've got a good handle on the business and you can forecast accurate projections as to where the business is going to go, and then you hit those forecasts, the level of information that is going to be expected is going to drop significantly because you're giving them what they want. So I think that that's a critical component, is establishing that level of trust and then holding yourself accountable to ensuring that you're hitting the targets that you're saying you're going to hit.
Great, interesting perspective. And Andy, from the manufacturing side, your thoughts?
Well, Marcus, from a distribution partner point of view, sees it exactly the same way. So, Marcus, you need to become a distributor for me. You need to move into dental for me, because you see it exactly the right way. No, trust is there. We talked about that. Let's not further add to that, but that's a very important part. But I think for me, when it comes to forecasting, which is critical, obviously my channel partners are doing stocking orders, which, and we mutually agree expectations on how frequently that might be based upon their certain business performance and, certain sort of seasonality, of course, as well. So that to some degree does mitigate the need for the detailed pipeline review. But of course, you want to see what's happening with the pipeline to see that you're heading in the right direction and that future forecasting is going to be fulfilled with orders from the end customer. So pipeline transparency is important, but we just need to see numbers necessarily rather than names necessarily, right? So we don't need to know which dental customers they were for the sake of forecasting. However, in my particular business, it is helped because we do the clinical training for the channel partner with the end customer. So we do have to know the details of the customer. So there has to be kind of an element of trust in that. But they know that that's preferable because we're taking some workload away from them that we're perhaps in a better position to handle. So that kind of comes. But in the review meetings, we're not looking at that. We're looking at numbers, kind of that are getting towards the stage of the pipeline where orders are going to be flowing for them. And obviously all of the marketing, education and brand initiatives that kind of leads to that. That's kind of my additional thoughts on that one.
Any additional thoughts?
Well, it was mentioned earlier in the call, the scenario where if as a manufacturer, you provide leads to your distribution partner. I think that's a perfect, moment to validate, not that you would contact the end user customer and ask for feedback, but in that exchange, and Andy, you've just given that scenario, if your team is clinically involved in doing the training, I think it's a perfect opportunity to get a report card, a non-solicited, but just how responsive is your partner being? Are they leaning into the opportunity, or are they allowing you, the manufacturer, to do all the heavy lifting? So, but I just like that the dynamic that provides on an ongoing relationship, because when you're creating a pull for your partner, that's great value add. In fact, I'd say most distributor partners, that's a big requirement for them. They do expect that the manufacturer is going to provide them with those kinds of leads.
Excellent. So the final question in this section, and just as I'm doing that, just remind everyone that you can put your questions in the Q&A panel. As we're getting close to the end of the prepared questions here, we'll get ready to start answering some of your questions. I have another poll coming up here in a minute as well. But in terms of it's funny, it's come up a few times now, and I liked, Marcus, your comment about not calling it a review, calling it a strategic meeting or something along those lines. So one of the things I've heard from, and in fact, one of my colleagues here who's 40 plus years in the space, is that these reviews often become sessions where we rehash the same issues over and over again. And so the question here really is how do we avoid that? I guess first of all, is it true to your experience? Has that happened to you? And then how do we avoid that? Let's start with Denny on this one.
Well, every good issue management process has a resolution process component to it that helps to visualize, and track, who's going to resolve the issue, how is it going to be resolved, and when, what's the timeline on that. And I'm a big proponent of creating a database, or some call it an issues log. So it's a central database where people can report problems when, with projects as they arise in real time, and the team members can identify, implement, track solutions. The log provides a clear process for handling and resolving issues before they become too big. And when they become too big, they can really sidetrack an entire project. So using this issue log will ensure a number of things: a consistent way for team members to raise concerns, a way to assign people to different problems and track their progress, a method of analyzing and prioritizing, which issues they're addressing, a way of recording the solutions so that the team can use it for future, so that, if there's a pattern, you're not having to stop and do the analysis, it's already there. And then monitor the many moving pieces of a successful project.
Marcus, your thoughts?
Couldn't agree more with the recording and maintaining a log of issues that have been addressed and who is going to be taking the lead on being accountable for resolving them. I find that issues that are brought up consistently over and over again in meetings are issues that just nobody wants to touch. And as a result of that, they fester. And as they fester, things get worse. As they get worse, distractions start to arise. So holding each other accountable and ensuring that we have a path to resolution on the issues that are presented from both sides is critical in maintaining a strategic focus moving forward. In future meetings, we don't want to talk about the same thing again. We want that to be done, and we want to be talking about growing the business again. So holding that accountability is a big piece for us.
I would agree to that. I would also say the fixed agenda is a helpful way of the topics not getting off track, that we have kind of like our set process to follow. The other thing I want to just comment on, it's really been said, but just to reinforce it from my perspective, that often, challenges, issues that need to be covered, it's decided that we need to do something about it. Often the person allocated is allocated, but often is what gets missed is when is it going to get done by. It's that when thing. It's such a critical part of execution, and that the person themselves has the chance to kind of indicate when is kind of reasonable, because then we can hold one another accountable. I find most often it's I know this person was going to be doing something, because we never agreed to when. We don't know when we can chase them up, or when they team can chase them up, because we didn't agree to it. Yeah. So I think the when is very important.
Okay, excellent. So Angela, just if you wouldn't mind bringing up the poll question on business reviews. Let's get this one up there. So very simple question. Do you agree or disagree that your business reviews are relevant and impactful? This is obviously anonymous, so feel free to respond to that. This time I'm going to give Angela a second or two, and then we'll also bring up the results of the last poll. So just give that a second or two more as people are answering this poll question. And then Angela, whenever you're ready, we can bring up the results of the 2 poll questions so far. Interesting. So 78% agree that they're relevant and impactful in terms of business reviews. And how about the next one? Or the first one, I should say, the first poll. Proactive partnerships. So some felt that none of them were proactive. A third, 25% of them were proactive. 41% said half of them are proactive. 16% said 75% proactive, and then no one said all of them are proactive, which I think that would be, I'd probably call you out if you said 100% of them were proactive. So yeah, interesting. So okay, just as we're getting ready to wrap up a few things here, I'll remind you just on the questions and answers. If you have any questions, I should say, put them in the Q&A section or the chat. Either way is fine. I'm going to just have a quick look at those as you're doing that. So we'll open up for questions now, and I'm going to start with a couple here. So this is kind of interesting. This one is a COVID pandemic related question, and I think it touches back a little bit to what Andy had mentioned previously about seeing people face to face. So will your business reviews become more virtual post pandemic, or will you return to what your normal travel schedules were prior to the pandemic? In other words, has it really changed the way you might conduct these and interact with your partners to do more of it virtually as a result of your experience over the last few years? So I don't know who wants to go. Just jump in, guys.
I'll start with it. Andy, I think you'll jump in as well, because I think you're in the same boat I am in that the pandemic really reduced my travel, as I think it did everybody. I feel that moving forward, as a result of really trying to balance out work-life balance and realizing that the travel got a little ridiculous after a while, that it will change some of the quarterly business reviews, as specifically with suppliers that have some distance between our location and theirs. However, I agree with Andy that in-person meetings just bring so much more value in ensuring that we're aligned on what we're trying to accomplish moving forward. It gives us an opportunity to table things and really read both the verbal and nonverbal communication that is coming from across or around the table. I think they're critical. I don't think it's going to be something that goes back to the previous cadence was before in terms of being in person all the time, but I will attempt to do it at least once a year and ensure that we're in person so that we can connect and have that level within the business partnership.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would say that if you've already formed a relationship between the parties, you've met in person already, then those remote business reviews are going to be more effective than if you haven't met each other. I just feel that's sort of human nature. So given that I'm relatively new into my organization, I'm going to make a big effort to get around and see people in person. But I think they can be very efficiently done remotely once the relationship is established, and especially if you've got a shared platform where the data's there, that people can look at that data offline, and you've got kind of formats and using the technology as best as possible. I think you can get a lot done that way. And then I would say it's just probably when you can travel associated with things like exhibitions, etc., just to make the use of that opportunity and that timing to have meetings where you are looking at the business strategically together, to get away from the review word, because I do think that's a good idea. So strategic reviews, make them opportunistic a little bit around when travel's planned, but planned in advance, of course. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a mixture of the two.
Yeah, I did a quick plug for Mike Caribou. When I do the quick demo at the end for anybody that wants to stay on, I will show you how you can manage that communication and business reviews right in the platform. So Danny, anything you want to add to this topic?
I concur with my two esteemed colleagues here that it's going to find a hybrid model where the cadence won't be what it was pre-COVID, but it's certainly going to still require face-to-face, whether that's annual or I do like Andy's suggestion. I mean, there's the trade event world is finding its feet again. And so what better opportunity than to be in region and meet up with your partners in combination with those events.
Excellent. So how about a last one here that I think is really interesting, which is what do you do if your partner is pushing back and isn't putting the effort into communicating with you? So kind of a tough one, but I don't know who wants to start on this.
Well, let me just give some initial immediate reflections on that. I think you have to have the sort of honest, open conversation about the reasons for the pushback, and maybe say, look, we're in partnership together for a purpose. For me, partnership means that we work together and we are successful together. You can't be successful without me and my help, and I can't be successful without you. The pushback that I'm getting, I'm not understanding it, so let me understand it, please explain. And we've got to find a way to work together where the pushback, because I think it's reasonable to give pushback sometimes, either side, if things are being unreasonable. But if you're saying that what you're expecting is reasonable and they're not seeing it as reasonable, then you've got to kind of recalibrate what is mutually acceptable to both parties. So I think it's as I learned in the US, we would call it a come to Jesus meeting, where we would review the basis of our relationship in the first place and say, we've got to come to some realization about what is reasonable here. That's probably how I would approach it, I think.
If I could add to that, I think that, Andy, you've hit the nail on the head on the come to Jesus meetings. They're inevitable should expectations not be aligned within the partnership that you've established, or if something has changed significantly in the direction of your respective businesses. So I have found personally that when I see communication fall off within the partnership, it typically is either related to the manufacturer or my partner really focusing in a specific market and not viewing Canada as being a significant player within their business moving forward, which is understandable. It's just a level of communication that we need to have, or vice versa with us. If we realize that the direction that we are going within that partnership is not going to be conducive to the significant growth expectations we have within Canada, I find that sometimes we get distracted, maybe not hold our end up with the bargain. So it really is about the cadence and communication and that level of trust and transparency. Going back to what Andy mentioned, there's nothing wrong with pushing back and trying to understand where things are at, but it also is an indicator that you're not aligned and where you're going moving forward.
Yeah.
Denny, any final thoughts? I'm going to just quickly wrap up in a minute here, but
no, I think again, both Andy and Marcus really covered the key points there.
Okay, so there are a few other questions that several questions we didn't get to. We will get you answers and send them in the follow-up. I do want to just hit on a couple things very quickly to wrap up the session today. The first is that this was part 2 of a 3-part series around stronger medtech partnerships. So part 3 is coming up 2 weeks today. If you registered for today, which obviously you all did because you're on the call, you are automatically registered for the next one. We also, though, do just want to point out we've got a little promotion we're doing around social media. We're doing a $200 Amazon gift card. So all you have to do is follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter and share our upcoming webinar post. And then we're going to draw for a winner of that gift card. So I know people have done that already in advance of this one. We'd love it if you did that. If so, you'll be in that draw. In terms of just quick final slide here. Thank you, Marcus, Denny, Andy. Really appreciate your time today and your insights. We will summarize notes as we do on all these sessions and include that in our follow-up, as well as a link to the recording if you want to share with any colleagues or go back through it afterwards. Marcus, Denny, and Andy have all provided their contact information here as well. Feel free to reach out to them. Denny is a market consultant, as you're all aware, helping manufacturers in particular go into the Australia, New Zealand market. Andy on the manufacturing side, Marcus on the distributor side. Feel free to reach out to them if you got business opportunities or just want to reach out. They're more than open to that. So I'm going to wrap it there. You can sign up for My Caribou directly through the link, and I'm going to spend a few minutes now doing a demo of the product for anybody who wants to stay on. And in particular, I'm going to focus on business reviews and communication between partners, in addition to finding new partners in the platform. So guys, thank you so much. You're all on the platform, so you don't need to stay for the demo. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to switch gears here to show the platform now.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.